Rebellions aren't just about ideals, they're about people. Hey there, folks. I want to talk about Star Wars Andor, which wrapped up last week, I think, if I've got my timing right. Yes, last week, about a week and a half ago. Now, if you've been following over in the break room of Geeks, I've been doing episode by episode reviews. And if you have been following me there, then a fair amount of this is going to be reiterative of things I've been saying in those reviews. But I still want to talk about it on my bigger platform because this was an amazing show, especially for me. I have had a sinking feeling for a little while that maybe Star Wars isn't for me anymore. That's kind of been going on to varying degrees since, well, basically since after Rogue One. Rogue One was the last Star Wars related thing that I really did like pretty unequivocally. But everything since then has had varying degrees of issues, or I just haven't been connecting with it. Even stuff that I have liked hasn't really stuck with me. I did like, well, at least the first half of Book of Boba Fett before it became Mandalorian 2.5. The Mandalorian, I get the appeal of it. It doesn't connect with me. I have not been able to get into it the way that so many other people are. Or even Obi-Wan, which I liked, didn't stick with me very much at all. Hasn't left any kind of lasting impact. It was fine. I enjoyed it. And then I moved on. I was trying to get the sense that what people who still love Star Wars are there for and what they were getting, their desires as fans that were getting fed were just not matching mine. And honestly, like, that's okay. People can like the same thing for different reasons. But what that can sometimes mean is when you do something that is fan pleasing, it might not be pleasing to all fans because not all fans are in love with the exact same aspects of a thing. And so for me, as someone who has always had Star Wars in my life, to the point that I don't actually remember watching these movies for the first time, I don't remember doing that. They've just always been there. The things that Star Wars likes to focus on and that the fans, most of them, tend to also focus on aren't really where a lot of my interests lie. I suppose the simplest way that I can put that is when I was a little kid and I would just play Star Wars. I don't mean like with action figures or whatnot, like just pretend that I was in that setting. I didn't imagine myself swinging a lightsaber. I imagined myself piloting an X-Wing or hunkering down with a blaster and trying to escape the hordes. But I didn't think of myself as a Jedi. And that's not to say that the Force, the lightsabers, the story of Luke or Vader or whatever don't hold appeal to me. They do. But they're not so much of an appeal to me that I want that more than I want anything else. I mean, it was 2 years ago when Star Wars Visions came out. And my big frustration with that was because I hadn't wanted to get like the various animation styles and whatnot spoiled for me ahead of time. I didn't realize that every single story was going to center around either a Sith or a Jedi or both. And by about halfway through that anthology, I realized, oh, every single one, despite how huge and massive and sprawling this universe is, we're going to have every single one of these be about Jedi and Sith. And some of them are even good. But it didn't matter because, like, I'm tired. I'm tired of that. I'm burnt out. And again, I'm not the only one saying that. And some people have turned to things like The Mandalorian. But again, even The Mandalorian, for me, while the actual titular character is not a Force user, the story centers around quite a few of them, actually, at this point. From season 1, it centers around a Force user. And then later on, as stuff gets dropped in over the course of season 2, it's a whole bunch of nostalgia stuff that I'm not unnostalgic for, but just I'm like, okay. It wasn't quite scratching the itch. It's like when somebody's trying to scratch an itch that you can't reach, and you want to go like just little to the left, little to the left, little to the left. You're not quite there. That's like the Mandalorian for me. And so I was just starting to come to terms with the fact that maybe Star Wars isn't for me anymore. Like, I tried to watch Bad Batch. I bailed because it was far too dependent on pre-existing knowledge of things like the Clone Wars show and Rebels, which might be fine, but I don't have the energy to do right now. And so much of what is planned for the future Star Wars, I just look at the titles and I'm like, the thought of that is exhausting. I was excited about Andor, though. I was pretty much only excited about Andor because I like Rogue One so much. And something that is in Rogue One that I liked a lot and was what I wanted from Andor, and I got, but I also got a lot more than this. But what that was an examination of just people, the ground level, living day to day, not out in the outskirts, pulling together of forces. We go and we fight and we go to destroy the Death Star and we make plans in our pristine white robes with our holographic displays. No. Ground level, boots on the ground, not Force users, not people who will probably even be remembered by name. What's it like for them? What's their contribution? And Rogue One gave me that. And I wanted more of that from Andor. And it gave me that. So I was already very happy. But it also gave me something more. Andor gave me possibly the best and most astute dissection and presentation of fascism that I think I've ever seen. Because it's not just an aspect of what's going on. This is a story about existing under a fascist system and within a fascist system. Every single character, we see how this system affects them. The good guys and the bad. I don't mean that in and it makes you feel bad for the bad guys because they're kind of victims too. In a way, some of them are. But this thing gets fascism so well because under fascism, nobody's happy. Nobody. There's the people, obviously the oppressed, very directly being harshly dealt with, having their rights restricted, removed. The workers who are cogs in a machine. But even the enforcers, even the people who keep the system running, and in theory are the beneficiaries of that system, they're not happy because they know they can lose it on a dime. It can be taken from them as they take it from other people. They have to watch their backs. It harbors paranoia amongst everybody. You can't trust anyone because you can be turned over to just be ground up into the gears of this system. A fascist system doesn't see people. It sees functions. If there's a function you can be fulfilling, be it through labor, coerced, or forced, if it be a function through planning and tactics, whatever it may be, there is a function that the system needs filled. Can you fulfill that function? We have use for you. But if you can no longer fill that function, or if you're fulfilling it suboptimally and somebody else is better, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how loyal you've been to the system. It doesn't matter how much you believe in the purported ideals of a fascist system. None of that matters because you're not a person. You're a function. And if the system can't use you, it will dispose of you. And that is true of everyone at every level within it. And this shows that. This does such a good job of getting down to the granular level because, as I said, the rebellion and then the resistance in the sequel trilogy, they have generally been shown idealistically, fighting for freedom, planning their grand frontal assaults, coming up with their strategies. But the things that actually have to be done, and the lives that have to be lost, and the lives that have to be taken in order for those plans to come to fruition, that's what this deals with. Now, that's not to say Star Wars has never tried to grapple with these things. Sometimes it's been very offhandedly, like all the way back in Return of the Jedi with this line from Mon Mothma.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
This is a bit of a throwaway line, but it's an attempt to acknowledge that what we have that we're going to try and use to bring about the peace has already cost a lot of lives. We don't see them, though. More recently, you had some of the things that The Last Jedi was doing. Now, I made a promise to myself that I would not let this devolve into a slagging off of The Last Jedi, because I still don't like The Last Jedi. However, I do need to point a couple of things out. My overall feeling about The Last Jedi at this point in time is that I can understand, appreciate, and even get behind a fair amount of what it is doing or trying to do on paper. I have issues both with some specific execution, but also I feel that the context of that film was not the place to explore these ideas. When it came to things like deconstructing and pulling apart the validity of the Jedi at all, I don't have a problem with that as a concept. But doing that as part of your main numbered saga, as the second entry in a trilogy where the first entry already did all this work setting up that this is going to be a joyful nostalgia trip, that's maybe not the way and the place and the time to try and do that. And it also tried to do something that Andor spends basically its entire runtime doing, which is to highlight that the Resistance is not blameless, that there are wicked things that happen, and that the Resistance is either aware of and ignores, or maybe even has decided doesn't have a problem with, or at the very least isn't dealing with right now, because they've put their priorities elsewhere. And there are bad people who are empowered and enabled by what the Resistance either does or doesn't do. And that's not an invalid thing to bring up at all. But it's kind of very telling that the Canto Bight sequence where that takes place, I see very few people, even people who love the movie, defending that scene and those moments in their entirety as far as the actual flow and structure of the film goes. When I see defenses of Canto Bight in The Last Jedi, I generally see defenses of what it's attempting to illustrate. And I can get behind that, but I don't think it works there. It works here. And the one last comparison I'll make with The Last Jedi, and then I'll try and get off this topic. You take something like the very last image of that film, of this kid, just some kid, we don't even know his name, who appears to have a gift with the Force. And to end on that image, an image that implies the next hero can come from anywhere. That's a great shot in the wrong movie. Had that been the last shot of the trilogy, perfect, no notes. But as the last shot of a middle trilogy that even before the following entry was completely reworked from the ground up and is an absolute mess, but even the earlier plans of what it was going to be was never going to pick up on that thread, that's not the place to make that point. It doesn't fit. It doesn't flow. And even within the context of The Last Jedi on its own, taking the mess that is The Rise of Skywalker out of it, it still doesn't really work because that kid's a prop. The actual oppression that is felt by people like him is acknowledged and pointed to, but it's not explored. He doesn't have a voice, that child, nor does anyone else like him. They are talked about. They are not given the actual stage to give their stories. Andor gives them that. And I know I said I was done with Last Jedi. This is truly the last thing. Out of just raw curiosity, I ran a poll on both Twitter and on the community tab for my own YouTube channel. Now, the results of these polls are not some like conclusive thing, because obviously they're pulling from a pool of people who either subscribe to me here or follow me on Twitter, or the poll was brought to their attention by people they know who do follow me on Twitter or subscribe to me here. So like this is a pool of likely like-minded people to myself, but I still found the results interesting. What the question was an attempt to find out if people who like The Last Jedi also like Andor. Because basically, I'd had the thought, you know what's something I wouldn't understand? If somebody did like The Last Jedi, but didn't like Andor. I knew it was possible to like Andor, but not The Last Jedi, as I am an example of it. But given that Andor really felt like it was absolutely nailing multiple things, not everything, but multiple things that The Last Jedi was trying to do that didn't work, for me at least, I was curious, like, is that an opinion held? People like The Last Jedi is great, but Andor is bad. And it turns out, at least by those polls, no. The exact numbers vary from the Twitter and the YouTube poll, but the overall shape of the results is exactly the same. Of the four options, liking The Last Jedi but not Andor, liking Andor but not The Last Jedi, liking both or liking neither, the one with the most votes was liking both, followed by liking Andor, not liking The Last Jedi. And then at the very bottom, under even liking neither one, was liking The Last Jedi and didn't like Andor. So that felt very validating in terms of feeling like whether or not you think Andor does it better than The Last Jedi, at the very least, it seems to hit a similar nerve with a similar crowd in terms of people are liable to like it if they also liked that. And even a decent amount of people like it who even didn't like that. So, hey. But let's get back into Andor itself, because I've probably spent longer on The Last Jedi than I meant to already. If there's one thing that's possibly a little misleading about Andor, it's the title. Cassian Andor is not really the lead. He is our mechanism and our guide and our connecting point through all the things that the show shows us. But he's not really the lead. He doesn't have all that much of an arc as a character. We don't really get to have any particularly deep examination of him. He doesn't do a ton of self-examining. I mean, he's a survivalist. He has a certain sense of honor. He has a certain sense of right and wrong, but he's going to do what will get him to survive the situation he's in. That's kind of just fundamentally who he is, and that never really changes. But that's fine, because it is through him that we connect all the pieces. It is through him that we get to see the workers at a ground level who have been trying to stay out of the conflict of those resisting the fascist empire. It's how we get our taste of the building rebellion and the people at the ground level who are involved in that. It's through Andor that we get our taste of the people who are running that rebellion or trying to. And that's another thing that this gets really, really well about not only fascism, but about the layers involved in trying to fight it. Because you do need people at the ground level who are willing to fight and who have to be doing it, honestly, probably just for their own survival. In many cases, in the cases of something like the prisoners, they literally have nothing to lose other than their lives. But that also means they have everything to lose. And so you need people who have just had it and will take whatever comes at them if it means they stand up and say, we're not putting up with this anymore. But you also need people who will channel that, funnel that, organize that. And that's where you get characters like Luthen and Mon Mothma. And Luthen in particular, I find fascinating because Luthen is not a million miles away from the fascist system he's trying to take down. He does not see the people that he is moving about and helping to command to get these resources, raid this place, recruit this person. He doesn't really see them as people. Because if he saw them as people, he would not be able to do what he does. He would not be able to order the commands that he makes. And he would not be able to keep an eye on the greater good if he was worried about these people as people.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them.
But the show also understands that that does not make him the same as the Empire, if only for difference of motive, because there is a similarity in terms of what he does, but why he does it is very different, and that matters because the Empire sees people as functions and as cogs and as not people, because that is how it maintains its own power. That is how it holds on to its strength or the illusion of its strength. That is how it maintains the death grip that it has on everybody. Luthen does view those under his command, for lack of a better way to put it, in a fairly similar way, but with the goal of breaking that. It's not even clear that Luthen wants power. It doesn't really seem, or at least at this point, has not been laid out that he wants to actually ascend to power. He doesn't want to be the one in charge. He just wants to break what is currently in place. And he is willing to use tactics and approaches that would not be a million miles away from being at home within the Empire in order to do it. But again, that does not make him equivocal to the Empire, because what his goal is and what he's trying to accomplish is fundamentally opposed to what the Empire is doing. That's a tough balance to strike. To show the callousness of someone on the quote-unquote right side of a conflict, but to not have it be an equivocal, both sides, because never for an instant, ever, does this show present the growing rebellion or any of the people in it as equivocal, even when they have a similar outlook and approach like Luthen does. He's still not the same, and the show never presents it as if he is. This is part of what fascism does. It doesn't just oppress, it twists. It twists those within its workings to view all others the way that the system desires them to be, as functions, as resources, not as people. And even those who wish to fight against it, it twists them, because you cannot fight something like this with ideals alone. You have to be able and willing to do what it takes to dismantle this. And that will mean doing things that, on paper, in terms of ideals, principles, are bad things. But even as someone like Luthen says, this is for the greater good, he doesn't let himself off the hook, and the show doesn't let him off the hook. It doesn't pretend that there isn't an understandable reason for why he is making these decisions. But it also doesn't pretend that just because he's doing it for the right reasons doesn't make these actions okay. Or, to pull a quote from one of my favorite doctors from Doctor Who,
It's never find blue stuff up. Sometimes, sadly, it's the only solution.
yeah, objectively, It's not okay to blow things up, but sometimes you have to. And that doesn't suddenly mean that blowing things up is a righteous act, but maybe it's become a necessary one. It matters so much to me that this show understands the damage and how deeply rooted and far-reaching the damage of fascism in power is. And when characters, sometimes, in one case posthumously, point out, this came about and we didn't do more to stop it because we said, well, we have each other.
We took their money and ignored them. We kept their engines churning, and the moment they pulled away, we forgot them. Because we had each other.
We'll hold on to what we have and we'll get through this. Well, this thing that we have allowed to get into place is not going away.
But we were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. It's here and it's not visiting anymore.
And it will take the very thing that we were taking comfort in from us if we don't fight back. Well, at this point, even if we do. But this has to be opposed. And it will be done at a cost, a great cost, a continually paid cost. But it has to happen. This is one of the purest pieces of anti-fascist entertainment that I've seen. And it is done methodically and thoughtfully. Most things of entertainment that you can point to as anti-fascist have a tendency to not have the time or the space or the breathing room to really examine what fascism looks like beyond, the iconography of things like the Nazis. You can evoke that easily enough and it'll do in a pinch if all you've got is 2 hours for a movie. But when you've got 12 hours for a series, you can really, really get in down in the dirt, dig in to these systems, show what they do to people, also show their weaknesses. Because as I said, even the people within the system don't actually benefit from the system. And maybe it doesn't take that much pushing to get them to flee, to bail, to turn on each other, to reveal that they are not as strong as they project themselves to be. Because fascism holding on to power is not about strength. It is about the projection of strength. They have to look like they are always in control. But sometimes in trying to do so, they tip their hands. Or as Cassian puts it,
power doesn't panic.
So you have something like the prison that has barely any guards. Nobody is watching. Nobody is listening to the prisoners because they don't have to. If the prisoners believe that there is no way for them to escape, then they won't try. But that illusion is not real power. And the illusion of control is just that. And illusions are a lot easier to break. But of course, it's not an illusion with nothing. There is actual violence. I was going to say power, maybe not really power, but there is certainly violence behind an attempt to hold on to that power. And that violence will be enacted. This show understands that balance between, yes, this is terrible, this is oppressive, this must be fought, but it's not unstoppable. It will tell you that it is. It will tell you that you can't fight it. Because it needs you to think that. But it wouldn't need you to think that. It wouldn't need to tell you that if it was actually unstoppable. This thing understands fascism so well. And it shows how everyone can, in some way, push back against it. People with influence, with money, with nothing, The power holds when no one acts. And it weakens for every single person who does. This is a phenomenal show. And its journey through the different aspects of an oppressed society and the people within it who are broken, breaking, fighting, and working within that system is so dense. The more I think about this show, or any given episode of this show, the more I love it. And I haven't felt that way about Star Wars for a long time. I'm not going to say that this reignites my passion for all things Star Wars. This is a very specific sliver of Star Wars that I didn't think I had any right to hope I'd get. But I have it now. And I'm so happy to have it. And I don't need all Star Wars to look like this. I don't need all Star Wars to be this gray, frankly, at times depressing look at how awful everything is. Although, to be clear, there are wonderful moments of hope and catharsis in this show as well. But this is not a tone I want all Star Wars to be. But this is why this was the perfect venue for this. Remember how I said some of what The Last Jedi didn't work for me because that felt like the wrong place to do it. This is the right place. Side project. Not a main part of the saga. Not going, this is definitive Star Wars, but going, hey, we're going to take this thing off to the side. You don't have to take it in. That's up to you. It's optional. But we're going to dive deep into stuff that we don't have the time to do in the main bombastic, nostalgic spectacle saga. This is what I have wanted these side stories, these side projects to be. I don't want a show that captures what the movies does or tries to. I have the movies for that. I want this. And now I have it. And maybe it's not for everybody. Because again, what people love about something isn't going to be the same across the board. So maybe what you love about Star Wars means Andor doesn't hold a lot of interest for you. And that's fine. But speaking as someone who felt like their love and their focuses as a fan were just going to be ignored, this was such a treat. And I'm so excited for the second season. Andor. Bit of a gushing review, not even, but I really did like it. What were your thoughts on this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills around here. Any amount you can help is of great assistance, even if you can't. Like, share, subscribe will help me out. But what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. End credits, that means I need to shout out my top Patreon supporters. Robin Moore, Zupin Lutfula, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Linda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Renabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shay Legorle, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name in the credits too by checking out the rewards on the Patreon. You only tried to eat my earring once this time. That's much better.